With that down, let's get into main topic number 1, shall we? And our first main topic today gets submitted to us by Jay Master, who writes, "Hey, John. In a new interview Robert Downey Jr. had with a Smartless Podcast via comicbook.com, he was asked what his potential future of returning to the MCU, then Robert following the question with one simple answer. That's all done. That's all done, said Robert Downey Jr. Interesting that he would say that. Meaning that his portrayal of the character of Tony Stark / Iron Man is over. Giving the fact that his character sacrifices in the final battle of Avengers Endgame with the Infinity Gauntlet to save the entire universe, what are your thoughts on Robert Downey Jr. confirming that his overall deal with the MCU is done?" All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, man. And listen, for those of you who aren't like 100% clear on what it is he's referring to, yes, Robert Downey Jr. just to do this podcast, he was asked specifically what is his status with his deal with the MCU and all that kind of stuff. And here's what was said. "Sorry, Marvel fans, this comes to us from comicbook.com. Robert Downey Jr. is once again confirming that he is done with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Robert Downey Jr. was making an appearance on the Smartless Podcast hosted by Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett, which is quite a lineup of people, where he said in no uncertain terms that that's all done about his MCU obligations. That's all done. When asked about how he's balancing family and Marvel movie time after Iron Man's big death in Avengers Endgame." All right. So let's look at this for a second. Right around the time of Endgame, Robert Downey Jr. got on the Joe Rogan podcast and also said, yep, I'm done, which is, of course, what he was supposed to say. Now, in this new thing, he's saying, yeah, that's all done. But comicbook.com and others do point out that he was specifically referring to his obligations to Marvel and the MCU. That's done. If you guys remember correctly, if you go back a number of years, there was a time when Robert Downey Jr.'s deal with Marvel was coming up. This is going back years ago. And the big question was all around, well, is he going to re-up? And he says, well, whatever happens, but my contract is coming to an end. I'm done. And then he did the movie with Robert Duvall that he produced called The Judge. And The Judge flopped hard. I personally like the movie, but it flopped hard. Suddenly, there's a new deal signed between Robert Downey Jr. and Marvel. Now, am I saying it is a direct cause and effect? Not necessarily, but I kind of am, but not necessarily. Fast forward now, he's done Iron Man forever. He's one of the biggest stars in the world. What happens now? Well, he does Doolittle. That flops hard. Look, I've said this in no uncertain terms before, and I will say it again. It doesn't matter what Robert Downey Jr. says right now. It does not matter. I am telling, and it doesn't matter what Chris Evans says right now either, Scott. I am telling you and the world right now, Robert Downey Jr. will be back in some way, shape, or form in the MCU. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year, maybe not in 3 years. But he, Chris Evans, they will be back. Maybe for a one shot, maybe permanently, I don't know. But they will be back. And I don't care what they say now, just like I didn't care what Robert Downey Jr. was saying back when that original contract negotiation stuff was going on. It doesn't matter. He will be back. So to me, this is a non-issue. But Scott, you have a lot more experience than I do with people like Robert Downey Jr. and whatnot. You heard what Robert Downey Jr. said. Do you think he's actually done and we have seen the last of Robert Downey Jr. in an MCU movie, or maybe not?
John, I want to answer your question directly, and then I have a really funny story for you. So to answer your question directly, all you need to do to really ponder whether or not Downey is really done is if you go to IMDb and you go to Robert Downey Jr.'s page on IMDb. Do that right now while we're doing this. And you scroll down to his upcoming credits. It says Black Widow rumored cameo. Now, Black Widow obviously takes place in the past when Tony Stark was still alive, and so was Black Widow, because they both died in Avengers Endgame. So there is a chance that even though Downey's saying my deal is done, that he did in fact film a cameo appearance in Black Widow. It's just a rumor, and I did hear the rumor elsewhere, but when I was prepping for your show this morning, and I went to Downey's page on IMDb, and there it is. IMDb is pretty good with stuff like this. They're IMDb. So I do think that there's something to, maybe we'll see sort of a very short appearance like we did of Tony Stark at the end of The Incredible Hulk back in 2008. I think it's a very strong possibility, especially because of the time frame of Black Widow, that we have not seen the last of Tony Stark in a new feature film. Now, the funny story is this, John. So back in 2017, 3 long years ago, I was in New York for the junket for Spider-Man Homecoming, which was basically an Iron Man film in addition to being a Spider-Man film. So I was there for 2 reasons. I was there because I was moderating the press conference, and I was also doing junket interviews for Access Hollywood. So I moderated the press conference with, there must have been 10 people on that panel. It was such a thrill because I'm such a big Spider-Man fan. And the press conference is on YouTube. You can check it out for Spider-Man Homecoming. So in between the press conference and my junket interviews, I wanted to change my clothes so I didn't wear the same thing during the junket. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to change. So the press conference was on one floor and the junket was on another floor. So when I took the elevator up to the floor where the junket was, no one else was in the elevator with me. I did a real quick change of my shirt, but I had to, take off my jacket and my shirt and, loosen my pants a little bit. And then I'm standing there without my shirt on and the elevator stops and I froze and I'm like, oh shit. The elevator opens. Robert Downey Jr. walks in and sees me standing there, literally caught with my pants down. And he laughs at me because, I've interviewed him a bunch of times. He knows me. He says, "This is the best thing I've seen all day." He was laughing so hard. And I said, "I'm so sorry." He goes, "No, thank you for this." He really took a lot of fun in the circumstance of it all. And I have a great story about it. But then, I'm putting my shirt back on. I said, "Let me ask you a question. What's going on with Iron Man 4? And he said, shook his head, "No Iron Man 4. He said, "I'm doing Homecoming. I'm doing the next 2 Avengers movies. And that's it. That's it." He was like, "That's it." And now this was back in 2017. So yeah, you're right. Doolittle didn't do well. Doolittle did little at the box office. So it's very possible that never say never again, right? That's what the Sean Connery's James Bond movie was. So I don't think we've seen the last of Tony Stark, and I think we're going to see him a lot sooner than most people are expecting to, because I think that we will see him in a cameo in Black Widow, and I would love to see Iron Man 4. I don't think that's going to happen. I think maybe having a prominent role like he's had in his movies, the Avengers movies, Spider-Man Homecoming. Yeah, maybe, Captain America Civil War. Maybe that's done. But we have not seen the last of Iron Man as Tony Stark with Robert Downey Jr.
Well, we live in a world where Ben Affleck is coming back as Batman. So I think it's safe to say, like you're saying, anything is possible at this point. Question is for you guys. Where does this leave you? Does this not change your position at all? Clearly, it hasn't changed mine. Do you think we have indeed seen the last of Tony Stark being played by Robert Downey Jr.? Or do you feel like me and probably Scott here that, no, we'll see him back again someday, just maybe not immediately or maybe sooner than we think? Jump down to the comment section below and let me know your thoughts. All right, guys.